Yes, hello everyone. Professor Delapine here, and what I'd like to do is show you a few techniques with regards to the final course project, which will pull all of your imagery together and make it look like it's part of each other. In other words, creating shadows or cutting holes in objects to make it look like, for example, this leg is fitting into this mouse. All right, so I'm going to start out with doing that. I'll make it look as if this leg is actually fitting into this mouse. So right now, if we zoom in here, we can see that it's just kind of pasted onto the mouse. So we're going to work with a technique that will help you with that. So I'm on the current layer here, and what I'm going to do is, with the layer mask active, I want to get a cleaner cut along this edge here. I don't know if cut's the right word, but so with black as my foreground color, my paintbrush is active, I'm at 100% opacity, and I'm going to click and just kind of form what I imagine this leg would look like if it's fitted into a cutout part of the mouse. Okay, I could shift click, but I'm going to do this free form because it's such an organically shaped object. All right, so I'm happy with that. And this is a little bit involved, but I'd like you to understand the principle of this. And before I even do this, I want to show you, I want to explain this in another way before I go in here and do this technique. I'm going to create a simple elliptical selection and save that selection as a channel. All right, I could name it. Actually, I will name it circle, and I'll hit OK. So what happened was I just saved this as a channel. And I know we have not gotten into channels too much, so just focus on this. I've saved an alpha channel. It's called alpha channels, and I called it circle. So if I select it, that's what it looks like in black and white. Okay, so if I go back to RGB, I still see full color. Now what I'm going to do is click and drag and create, let me do something a little different here. I'll create a rectangular selection. All right, so yeah, it's kind of overlapping there, right? I'll now save that. Select, save selection. If I don't, well, I'll name it. I'll call it a square, even though it's a rectangle, and I will then select that. So we can see that. So that's what the representation, that's what the alpha channel of the square looks like, and this is what the alpha channel of the circle looks like. All right, now what I'll do is this. I'm going to load the circle selection, and I'm going to go to select, load selection, and I'm going to select from the drop-down menu here, actually from these radio buttons, I'm going to select subtract from selection, and then I'm going to subtract the square from this elliptical selection, okay, and I'll hit OK. That's the result. So it subtracted that rectangle from this ellipse as a selection. Okay, so the new channel looks like this. I'm going to deselect, and that's what the new channel looks like. You can add to, you can subtract. So for example, if I loaded the circle selection and then went to select, load selection, add to selection, and selected the square and hit OK, I'd have that. All right, so I'll save that selection and hit OK, and this is what that looks like in black and white. So this, I've added them both together. Here I subtracted the rectangle from this ellipse, and I have that. All right, so these are basic principles. I wanted to explain this to you first. Keep in mind that I also went to select, load selection, blah, blah, blah. I could also do this. And this is the most efficient way, and this is the way I want you to remember. This takes a lot of time, going to select, load selection, subtract, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to control-click on the alpha channel to load that selection. And that's what essentially channels do. They're a way of storing selections for future use. I will now subtract the square from the selection. Okay? So instead of going to select, load selection, and hitting subtract and hitting OK, I could also hold down my control key and the alt key, and you'll notice a minus sign. And I'm now going to control alt click on the thumbnail for the square channel, and that also subtracts from it. In addition, I could hold down Control Shift, which will add to the selection. So I'll now add the square to the current selection. Okay? So it's the same end result, it's just a shortcut and a quick way of doing it. So, all that being said, I'm going to trash all these and start fresh. Do the following. So back here, I have my layer mask created for the leg. I'm now going to load the selection from the layer mask by control clicking on the thumbnail. So I have that selection loaded. I'm now going to go to Select, Save Selection. I'll call this leg and hit OK. All right. Now what I'm going to do is go to any selection tool and hit my left arrow key, and that moves only the selection over. All right. Now what I want to do is this. I want to subtract my originally saved selection of the leg from this. So I'll go to Channels, Control Alt, click on the leg thumbnail, and I've now subtracted what is represented as white here from that current selection. Okay, I didn't have to load that selection that I incremented over. I just subtracted that originally saved selection, and I get that. What do I do with this? Now, this is going to represent kind of like the area where the leg inserts into the mouse, so as if it was custom cut out of the mouse. So I'm going to create a new layer on top of this leg layer, clicking on the new layer icon, and now with my paintbrush active, and black is my foreground color, I'm going to get myself a reasonable size brush. I can now click and drag in here to paint along that channel that is created. Now let me take this another step further. I'm going to hide the selection. It will still be active, but it's just hidden from sight. So Control H to hide, makes sense. And now I'm able to click and drag, and you need to decide where to stop. Okay, this is probably not the best image to work with because there's very dark pixels here, so it's kind of hard to see. But this is the result here. All right, now what I'll do is just so you can see this a little better to see what we've done, I'll create an adjustment layer with levels to lighten up that leg, and I'll just, doesn't matter how light or dark, okay? I just want you to see the difference between where the leg ends and where the shadow starts. Okay, notice it's adjusted the levels to all the underlying layers. So I'm going to create a clipping mask by control clicking in between these two layers. I know I'm throwing a lot out at you. All right, so I'm sorry, I said control, I meant alt click in between these layers here. You'll see that funky looking icon. So I'll alt click. And now that levels adjustment layer has attached itself to the underlying layer. So now you can see that a little better. Okay. Again, this is non-destructive, so I can just throw this out later on, but I just want you to see what's going on here. Now I can do this. I could take this a step further, as if I haven't thrown enough at you. I'm going to go to this layer here and control click on that. I'm now going to save that selection. I didn't name it, doesn't matter. And now what I'll do is increment this over. So I'm going to hit my left arrow key twice and down once. It may be a little much. I'm going to do it just once. I'm going to come back one. Okay. And now what I'll do is go to my channels palette. And my intention is to create like a rim light, so that if something was actually cut out of the mouse, the light source is coming from the upper right. So there would be a hint of white or highlight around the edge of this hole that's cut out. Okay, it may not be true in reality, but I think faking it would be a very effective result, and you determine whether I'm right or not. So I'm now going to, that's the selection I just saved, right? I'm going to now Control Alt click to subtract that alpha channel from this. All right, so I have a little bit of a sliver in here. I'm going to hide that, Control H, and then with white as my foreground color, and I am going to be on the layer that has that shadow on it. That's actually the wrong term, but that hole that's cut out, I'm going to paint along that selection to create what I call a rim light. All right, that's probably a little harsh, so I'll lower the opacity of my brush and then just soften that a little bit. All right, so there you go. All right, this is not as effective as it could be, but it certainly grounds the leg, or maybe that's not the right term either, but it certainly looks as if the leg is now going into the mouse. All right, next step is I want to create a shadow that's on this mouse, because that's what would happen. That would ground this CPU to the mouse. All right, so let's go to that layer. And I hope I haven't driven you crazy here. All right, so what I'll do now is, and the rest of them are a little simpler, so I'm going to load that selection. I'm going to create a layer above the mouse here, and on the new selection, on the new layer, I'm going to go to my paintbrush tool. Black is my foreground color, and I'm going to keep my opacity kind of low because I want to control this more. I don't want to paint with pure black, and I want to make sure that my hardness is at 0%. I want a soft edge brush, and I want something that's very large, a larger brush. All right, so I'm hitting my right bracket key, and again I'm going to hit Control H to hide my selection. And now what I can do is slowly create and build up a shadow. Okay, it's as simple as that. So now it feels more grounded. Everyone has different imagery to work with, so everyone's going to have different needs. So I think these three techniques I'm talking about will cover most of them. All right, so that's the second technique. The third one is over here with this little game here that's sitting on top of this piece here. There should be a shadow under here. All right, the light source is from the upper right. So let's go to that layer. And actually the underlying layer is what I want. I want this layer here. And I'm going to Control click on that layer mask. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll create a new layer above that. And I could do the same thing. All right, I'm going to hide the selection. I could paint with black to build up a shadow. But I want to show you a different way and a more effective way, a truer way to create a true shadow. All right, so I'm going to delete that. So we'll start again. So we have the new layer here. What I'm going to do is go to my eyedropper tool and sample the darkest pixels down here of this area here. This looks fine. Okay, now I'm going to go back, and don't forget now my selection is hidden. All right, so it's going to protect. If I didn't have this selection active, when I paint it, it's going to go all out here. All right, so I want to have that selection active, yet a different layer, my blank new layer, is active. So now what I'll do is hide the selection, and I can actually increase my opacity and then click and start painting in there. All right, now the effect of this is that it's as if you're painting traditional paint on top of something, on top of your object. So it's kind of like fogging out all the details of what's supporting this game. So the answer is going to changing the blending mode. And you'll see that the default blending modes for shadows is multiply. All right, so we're going to select multiply. Look at the difference. You now have a true shadow. Okay, so I can continue to paint in here. All right, and I have more control because I can lower the opacity of that to soften it up. Or I can go back in and go to the eraser tool and select an appropriate size brush that has a 0% hardness. And I can actually change my mind. So I may want to soften this up a bit. It depends. So you have a lot of options there. So you have control, all right? So a multiply, as long as it's not black, as long as it's a color, the multiply blending mode will work. What the multiply blending mode does is it intensifies or increases the contrast or density of the pixels in the underlying layer. So again, you have control because you're on a separate layer, and there you go. All right, I've spoken long enough. I hope that has helped, and I think this kind of technique will help. Well, a number of these techniques, any one of these three, I know this can be applied to a number of your images, okay? And this will pull it all together. This will do what I call, this will make your image sing. All right? I hope this helps. Take care.